We are wrapping up the 13th chapter today. Krishna answered a number of questions. What is jnanam? What is gyayam? What is chaitra? Chaitragya? What is purusha? And prakriti? Things took kind of an Upanishadic twist. Dealing with these philosophical concepts. It's almost like I have a friend who just told me that they're gay a couple weeks ago. They just came out as being gay. They're not sure. Maybe they're bisexual, maybe they're gay. I think the bisexual thing is just a way for them to wrap their heads around their homosexuality, and they're dealing with it. They're Indian. And so he also told his mom he was gay. And his Indian mother's response was, "Oh, you must be haunted by a gay ghost." So there's a gay ghost that's haunting you, and that's why you are homoerotic. The person's not acting on their desires. So I don't know if they'd actually be called homosexual because they're not sexually active. The proper term might be homoerotic. You follow this? So that was their mother's response. You're haunted by a gay ghost. So, to someone from the United States of America, such a statement by the mother is disturbing on a number of levels. Number one, they believe in ghosts, which is, that's a kind of a big question. Number two, somehow they believe in gay ghosts, but they don't believe in gay people. So I don't know how you become a gay ghost. If there's no gay people in the world, how do you get a gay ghost? That's sort of a philosophical inconsistency. Then somehow ghosts are haunting you and it determines your sexuality, and it gets into this real Christian God and the devil type thing where everything bad you do, you're a rapist, oh, the devil made me do it. And so like anything that you do that's out of the norm with society now becomes the fault of somebody else. So it's like this incredible victimhood, a lack of responsibility, some weird like ideas about ghosts and how they affect human beings. And it also is just like incredibly condemning of the person. There's no support there. This person must feel totally alienated and unaccepted by their family members, and especially in a kind of a liberal, the U.S. has gotten liberal in the last 5 minutes. Keep in mind, being gay was illegal in the U.S. in 1970, but the U.S. has gotten a little bit liberal in the last 5 minutes, and so now it's like, oh my God, I can't believe people would have such terrible ideas. Although there's still conversion therapy going on all over the U.S., and so it's not like, 2/3 of our country or half of our country doesn't have their own variation of this kind of denial about homosexuality as a feature of human society. Now, do you choose to be straight? Do ghosts make you straight? They don't. It's pretty innate. It's pretty visceral. It's pretty much just kind of the way you feel. And so we have to assume that people who are attracted to the same sex experience the exact same visceral, innate, physiological, attraction. Otherwise, we're kind of hypocritical. We assume our sexuality is innate, and we can obviously, at a glance, immediately understand our nature. We never question it, but then somebody else has a different nature than us, and now all of a sudden we question it. Do you guys follow this? However, if I was to ask Ravi's the Indian guy in the room. Ravi, do you unmute your phone for a second? If I was to ask Ravi, and I was to say, hey Ravi, do you understand why this Indian lady might be feeling like her son is haunted by a gay ghost. Can you understand that? Is that a reaction that you can identify with, that you can understand? You can see why somebody might feel that way. You can empathize with them. You can sympathize with them. You get it? What would your response be, Raviji?
Prabhuji, I don't know, and in India they don't accept it, for sure.
They don't ask what?
No, they don't accept, in their family, if somebody is, say, come out and say gay, they don't accept it.
I know they don't accept, but that wasn't my question. Thank you. I mean, you've half answered my question. Listen more carefully to my answer. If my friend was in the room and he said, my mother said this to me, and everybody else went, that woman is crazy. I do not understand. I cannot imagine a mother thinking like that. Would you say, just like for instance in India, very common, that when you yawn, you snap your fingers in front of your mouth when you yawn. You know why you do this? So that ghosts don't enter into your mouth through your yawn. Because when you yawn, you open a door for ghosts to enter your mouth. And so you yawn to break up the space so that the ghosts are interrupted. There's ghosts flying around at all times, and they may at any moment enter into your mouth if you yawn. And so you snap your fingers and it wards off the ghosts. Have you ever seen people snap when they yawn, Raviji?
Yes. Yeah.
Very common, right?
Yes.
I myself snap my fingers when I yawn so that no ghosts will enter my mouth. I do it. I'm totally conditioned to do this. Have you ever been with me and I yawn? You'll see me snap my fingers. I'm not joking. My sons all do it. Sometimes we laugh about it, and we still do it because we're good, superstitious Hindus, and it got beaten into my head when I was a kid. Even though I don't know that I would actually believe this philosophically, just culturally I've been taught to do it, and so I do it. You follow? I never touch my lips to a glass when I drink from it. There are so many things that I do. When I wash my mouth out 12 times after eating to rinse out all the food out of my mouth. It's like, there's all sorts of things I do. So my question is not, do you agree? My dear Ravi, my question is not, do you agree? I'm not asking you that. I would not embarrass you by asking you such a question. My question is, do you understand this woman's reaction? Can you sympathize with it? Do you understand, oh yes, that does not strike me as being very strange? Can you culturally understand how someone might have that reaction? Do you understand my question?
Yes.
And what is your response?
I can understand her, saying like that.
Good.
Just deflecting.
That's all I needed from you, Prabhuji. That's all I needed. It was that easy. It's all I needed. When you look at another culture, sometimes the details of that culture seem really strange to you. Like they have this weird way of looking at the world which makes no sense to you. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. They may come to some conclusions you don't think are reasonable. They might have some roads they go down that you don't go down. But the basics are pretty simple and similar. We live in a heteronormative society where 95% of the human population is straight, is heterosexual. Therefore, to be homosexual is twice as weird as being left-handed. I'm left-handed. And not like left-handed like a little bit left-handed. I'm fully left-handed. I play mridanga left-handed. I throw a baseball left-handed. I bat left-handed. I write left-handed. I do everything left-handed. Except for eat. I eat right-handed. You know why I eat right-handed? Because I'm a good Hindu. And when I ate left-handed, I got scolded by my elders when I was a child. And so I learned to eat with my right hand. I chant with my right hand. I do puja with my right hand because right-handedness is normal. And so 10% of our population is out of luck when it comes to being left-handed. It's not supported. Indian society, one of these great civilizations, people live together in close contact. They don't have these civil wars fracturing their society left and right. They don't have these massive wars. They've lived in many ways like Chinese civilization, but even more so. They've lived in relative peace and harmony for millennia in India. And so normal patterns of behavior are really supported. So if 9 out of 10 people are right-handed, then right-handed is good. Right-handed is good. And that 10% that's left-handed, including yours truly, we get ostracized and criticized for being left-handed. So I guess I could start a movement, for left-handed Hindus and have rallies and make a big deal about it. But it's not like being left-handed isn't like being homosexual. It's not that big a stakes for me. And so I just went with the crowd and learned how to do everything I need to do right-handed. You follow? We live in a heteronormative society. And so being homosexual automatically makes you 1 in 20. Makes you a minority. Because society's been heteronormative for millennia or longer, then, it's not just something arbitrarily chosen. It's reflected in religious texts. It's reflected in philosophical texts. It's reflected in so many things. You do have little exceptions. If you read Plato's Symposium, it's clear that Plato is super gay, and so it's like a weird phenomenon that happened in Greek society, where upstanding members of society, upper middle class members of society, were heterosexual. They had children. And then they all had a gay lover on the side. And they practiced something called pederasty. Now I don't know if I'm even able to put this lecture online. I'm diverging too much from the topic at hand, but we'll see what happens. They practiced something called pederasty, which is where they would have a coming-of-age romance with a 13, 14-year-old boy who was going through puberty. He would then become romantically attached to an upstanding member of society, maybe 25 to 55. They would then have a torrid and spicy gay romance. And then when that boy reached a certain age, maybe when his facial hair grew in or whatever, at some point, then they would stop their relationship and that older member would move on to the next. And then that young man at this point would then get married and have a family. Now, given that 5% of the human population is gay, and this was widespread and so popular that Socrates was considered to be an anomaly because he didn't do it, and actually worked its way into the biographies of Socrates that he was unusual and strange because he didn't do this, we can understand that most Greeks practiced this at that period. Which means that people were artificially being gay even though it wasn't their nature. You guys following this? I'm going to get even worse now. There's a tribe in Papua New Guinea, one of these pre-civilized societies. They've got ritualized, standardized, normative child abuse that goes on, where young children fillet their elders. I'm not going to describe what that term means. And they do it so that they draw in the energy of the elder men in society, and it's done society-wide, and they're small tribes of people. Super disturbing anthropologist, because it shows even that child abuse, child molestation, is not universally taboo. because they find a society where it's entrenched in that society. And given that people who are attracted, pedophilia is less than 1% of the human population, then it must be that 99% of the people doing this, it's not natural for them, but somehow that's how they were raised, and so they ritualized it. You follow? So usually, we have gay people trying to fit into a heteronormative society, and that's problematic for them. And then usually, in this country, because it's not illegal, people are encouraged in their late teens, early 20s to come out, sometimes younger now. It's really shifted now. Now, if you're gay or even better, transgender, and you come out as soon as possible, it gets you some street cred, gets you some clout in junior high school and high school. And so there's that phenomenon. And there are points in the history of the world where being gay was part of being upwardly mobile. And then this thing is even there in Papua New Guinea that involves children, as stomach churning as that is. But you find people bending to fit into normative behavior because it just makes the world smoother. So when it came to me being left-handed, I just went with the flow. There wasn't that much stakes. I was young enough, and I didn't feel like making a big scene about it, and so I just learned how to do puja with my right hand, chant with my right hand, eat with my right hand. I never eat with my left hand, ever. It's not like I have to restrain myself. I've completely retrained myself. It's just not so difficult, People learn how to do this kind of stuff. It doesn't really work like that with your sexuality. It's too innate. It's too hardwired in your system. And so people end up living somewhat of an unfulfilling life. I also know a number of Indian people, men, who are gay. And they just decided, I don't care. It's not my thing. I want to get married and have a family, so I'm just going to get married and have a family and never really worry about it too much. They never explore it. It's never a part of their profile. They're aware, because they're honest with themselves, what their attraction is, and they just simply don't cultivate it and don't do it because they live in a society where the opinion of their parents matters more to them than anything in the world. I have an Indian friend who was married for 40 years. Now he's a sannyasi. He wanted to marry a particular girl in his college. And what that means is he saw her in class, decided he wanted to marry her, never spoke a word to her, and went to his father and said, "There's this girl in my class. I looked at her. She looked at me. I would like you to arrange the marriage." And his father said, "No. I have another girl from this village. She's connected to our family. You will marry her." And the son said, "Okay." Went to the village, met the girl, did not find her attractive. Was bummed. But because his father said that's what he wanted, he did it, married her, married for 40 years, had kids, had grandkids, fully successful, never cheated on his wife, never strayed, never did anything, was just a good guy, followed the rules. And I said to him, how does that, that's not how is that a love story? That's sounds awful, right? He says, "No, it made my father happy, and that's all that matters to me." If you watch a Hindi movie, I don't know what Hindi movies are like now. I don't really know what Hindi movies are like in the past. I've seen a couple of Hindi movies, the really good ones, Dev Das and stuff like that. I've seen a few over the decades. Whenever something just epic comes out, my wife just forces me to watch it. They're first of all, they're mind-numbingly long. They're 4 or 5 hours. By the time you're done with the movie, you're sick, you have a fever. That's it. So they're mind-numbingly long. And then they have half a dozen or a dozen dance scenes in them, which is just, musicals went out, in the 50s. We just don't do musicals anymore. And so, and don't tell me Chicago and Moulin Rouge. I never watched those movies either. And so, they're mind-numbingly long. They have these huge dance scenes that are kind of soft pornographic. They're they really go for it. And it's like, it gets kind of racy, you know? And then also, like, everybody does 1,000 outfit changes, which is just like how do they even pull that off? It's like wild. It's like some kind of weird Alice in Wonderland type thing. But the most disturbing thing about Indian cinema is that there'll be a boy, he'll fall in love with a girl, the parents will say no, they'll both marry people they don't like, and then the boy will save the village from a fire and die. And that's it. And so you end up watching the movie and you're totally dissatisfied because there's no all's well that ends well, which is actually a statement from Shakespeare. All's well that ends well. I think it's actually a play by Shakespeare, if I'm not mistaken. It's a short play by Shakespeare, one of his lesser-known works. All's well that ends well. That saying in English came from Shakespeare, along with wear your heart on your sleeve and all sorts of other things. So, boy meets girl, parents get in the way, they both marry other people, they're never happy, and then the boy dies in a fire, saving the village. And that's it. It totally rubs you the wrong way because it's a movie which is made for people who value doing your dharma above your personal happiness, who value making your family happy above your personal happiness. Because that's not the way we're trained in the West. When we watch that movie, it doesn't make any sense. You follow? Okay. Now, if you understand that there are different things that can motivate a human being to act in life, one of them is individualism, what makes me happy. Another one of them is familism, what makes my family happy, my tribe happy, my nation happy. And there are people in the world for whom they were trained that their personal happiness isn't so important, but their family's happiness is important. And when they make a decision, they should think 7 generations ahead. And that what happens to them isn't important. It's what happens to their children and grandchildren and their parents and their grandparents. And so they live in joint homes and they give their paycheck to their father and mother. And they live simply and do what they want and marry who they want and follow the rules of their tribe. And they feel happy doing that. And they don't feel stifled because their concept of self is that they're a member of a family. If you understand it from the point of view of what motivates people to act, then all of a sudden you can understand how that Indian man could have married someone he wasn't attracted to. How somebody could even live a straight life even if they were gay. You follow? And we value sensuality. Like what I want. It's not just that we value our individual pleasure. We value our individual pleasure and we base it on the fulfillment of our personal desire. It's not like we have a personal ethic that we follow. I mean, it is actually an ethic. It's a hedonic ethic. It's valuing your pleasure. But it's not that valuing pleasure and then determining that our pleasure is caused by sensual things. You follow? But there are people who might have a personal ethic. And what they want or what feels good. Like there's a fighter, his name is Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's the most successful fighter in the history of UFC. He won 29 fights, lost 0 fights, retired the lightweight champion of the world after putting on dominant performances over the best fighters on the planet in his weight class at his time. And he retired. His father wanted him to win 30 fights and retire. His father died of COVID, and then he retired. He retired because his mother asked him to. And he's from Dagestan. And he's a pious Muslim from Dagestan, from the Caucasus Mountains, essentially. And his mother said, I don't want you to fight anymore. And he said, okay. And he renounced his career. He got offered $100 million for one of his fights. And he just renounced it. They were offering him any amount of money to fight. And he said no. The biggest people in the world went to him and offered him a blank check. And he said no. And they didn't believe him. They thought it was a negotiating tactic. But after like a year, they finally got it. And he's like, yeah. And they couldn't wrap their heads around that his mother told him to stop, and that's it. I don't break my word to my mother. I gave my word to my mother. That makes me happy. So we don't just have an individual sense of self, we also have a sensual sense of self. But for the gay devotee who just wants to have a family and have children that are his own genes and carry on his family and do his family proud, and doesn't really identify with sensuality that much. It's very common. I don't know nowadays, but I lived in India, 30 years ago, for many years, and it was very common. I would meet men, not Hare Krishnas, just Hindus. And they never masturbated or fooled around their entire life until they got married. And the first time they ever had any kind of sexual pleasure in their life was when they were married and trying to procreate a child. 30-year-old man, had sex twice in his life to produce a child. His wife got pregnant on the second time, and that was it. The idea of engaging in sex life purely for pleasure was anathema to them. You follow? I'm not talking about Hare Krishnas. I know Hare Krishnas like that also. I'm talking about just regular people I met on the train and got to know. People I counseled at the temples I was living at. There's all sorts of different ways to live in this world. But if you take the time to ask the big questions, what is your sense of self? What is your sense of happiness? You can start to understand that everybody's really answering the same questions, even if they come to radically different answers than you do. You follow? How you could marry someone you weren't attracted to, or even go for an arranged marriage in the first place. How you could even mind-bogglingly be gay but live straight. And not then have a breakdown in your 30s and leave your family and you move to WeHo or something like that. Not like that. They actually that's their life. And they have no regrets and they're peaceful with it. It's mind-boggling, right? But it's actually not when you start to think in terms of what is your sense of self, what is your sense of happiness, what is your sense of integrity, what is your sense of normative behavior, what's most important to you, what makes you tick. You follow? Problem we have in the West is people have this heteronormative society, and then we also teach people to chase their dream and do whatever makes them happy. And those two things don't work together because 5% of the population is gay. And what are you going to do with them? Oh, now they're supposed to get all stoic when you just trained them for 20 years not to be stoic? It doesn't work like that. You follow? And that's how left-handed people can train themselves to be right-handed people. And now we go all the way back, and this crazy lady from India who thinks her son's haunted by a gay ghost. What does it boil down to? It boils down to she doesn't want to admit that that's her son's innate nature. She can't wrap her head around it. She's in just a basic denial. And that expresses itself culturally in her tradition through introducing ghosts. We have the devil made me do it. It's just as the devil's on your shoulder. The devil's greatest trick was making people think he didn't didn't exist. The devil's the ultimate ghost. You believe in ghosts, it's paranormal. You believe in devil, it's macrocosmic. And so half our country believes in that crap. You follow? And so when it's another culture and it's in a funny language and it's got some weird bells and whistles, we think, oh, these people are crazy. But then we don't notice that we got the same exact thing going on in your backyard with 50% of your population. In the most quote-unquote advanced civilization known to man. You get it now? So, Purusha and Prakriti, spirit and matter. You look at the world, and there's things that are alive, and there's things that are inert. And inert things are Prakriti, and alive things are Purusha. And somehow Purusha The soul has become immersed in Prakriti. And we've become enamored by matter, like a person in a virtual reality with amnesia, who doesn't realize they can live outside of the virtual reality. Similar to the blockbuster movie The Matrix, which uses the brain in a vat argument. If you guys want to look something up, look that one up. And so we have immersed ourselves in matter, and we value matter. We shine the light of our consciousness on matter, and matter becomes beautiful and important. And we think, if I just get this material thing, I'll be happy. And the light, our soul, which is made out of light, shines light on matter the same way you might shine light on a piece of film, on a piece of cellophane film. Well, I don't think they make film out of cellophane anymore. But shines its light on a piece of film, and then the film comes to life on the screen. But it's not alive. It's just a piece of film. Your light is what makes it seem wonderful. That lollipop when you're a child, that toy, or that spouse, or whatever it is you're chasing after that you think is going to make you happy. That's Purusha and Prakriti. The words might be different, some of the examples might be different, but it is the most straightforward and basic look at the world and see what's going on and start to make some sense out of the world. Chaitra and Chaitragya. What's the field that you operate on? Your body. There's Purusha and Prakriti, but what's the field that you get to operate on? Your body. You know your body. You experience your body. It's Purusha and Prakriti manifested in this world. It's your Purusha and Prakriti. You as a conscious soul in a body. It's your experience of Purusha and Prakriti. You go big and you see it's going on all over the world. But you just look at yourself and you see it's going on in your own reality. And then Jnanam and Gyayam. What's really worth knowing? What's the most valuable thing you can spend your life doing? What's worth pursuing? What's the one thing you need to accomplish in life? What's the most important thing to accomplish in life? What should you value above all things? There's a saying in the Mahabharata, you sacrifice a person for the village, a village for the country, a country for the world, and the whole world for your soul. What's the most valuable thing? What should you dedicate your life to? That's Gyayam. And then how can you cultivate that? How can you attain that? And that's Jnanam. What's worth knowing, and how can I go about knowing it? Where should I go on the map, and how do I get there? Who am I? What is this world? What is spirit? What is matter? Where do I want to go? And how do I go about getting there? Those are the 6 questions Krishna asked. If you just get hung up on the terms and the examples given and so on and so forth, it'll seem like we're trying to teach you another culture, another worldview, a foreign worldview. But if you take the trouble to distill it down to its bare essence, not only can you understand that crazy Indian lady with her gay ghost thing, but you can actually understand even an ancient text from a different people in a different culture. Did you guys follow this? So Krishna's explained all this. And he's explained there's different kinds of people with different sort of natures who pursue this truth. And then we get to text 28. One who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, actually sees. So If you look at this world and you see that consciousness is never destroyed, then you really see. The actual verse is Samam Saveshu Bhuteshu Tishtantam Padameshwaram. One who sees the same thing existing in all living beings, the Parameshwar, the Supreme Lord. Vinash Yatsu Avinasyantam. That is not destroyed even in destruction. Vinasyantu means when it's destroyed, when it will be destroyed, and then Avinashanta means it's not destroyed. When you see the Param Ishwar, the Supreme Lord, equally situated in every being, that's not destroyed even when the body's destroyed. Yapashati sapashati. One who sees like that, he really sees. One who sees the super soul accompanying the individual soul in all bodies and who understands that neither soul nor super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, he actually sees. You see what Prabhupada did there? Did a little something tricky there. Do you guys see it? The verse says the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada says the individual soul and the super soul. So there's two ways to do this. Do you, as a conscious being, continue to exist even when your body is destroyed? Yes. Could this verse pertain to you? Yes, it could. Although God is accompanying you in this world. Okay? But when your body dies, does God die? No, of course not. So does this verse refer to God or the soul? Either or both. Why? Because the parameters of the verse pertain equally well to the soul and God. And all throughout the chapter we've been talking about the soul and God. And so the verse, without anything telling us definitively what's being spoken about, could be about either one. Remember when Krishna said there's a Purusha Para, a supreme, who's Upadrashta Anumanta, he's the facilitator and the overseer, and he is the supreme being, and he's not like us, he's different than us. Remember that? Or when Krishna said, I am also a knower of the body, but I know everything and I'm omniscient versus you. So Krishna's introduced himself as being like us in the sense that he's a conscious being, but not like us in the sense that he's unlimited in his powers of cognition and his powers of action. So could this verse be about the individual soul or Krishna? Yes, it could. So what's the one clue we get in the verse? It says Parameshwar, which means great Lord. Parameshwar is a name for God. The individual soul is generally not called Parameshwar. You follow? However, the context of the verse, where it said previously whatever you see is just Purusha and Prakriti mixed together, Chaitra and Chaitragya mixed together, the context of it would support that it's the individual soul that's being talked about. But the word used in the verse is Supreme Lord. So it's like, do you take the word in the verse or do you take the context of the verse? And so what does Prabhupada do? What does Prabhupada do? He just says both. Traditionally, the commentators will pick one of the two. And they'll translate the verse one of two ways. They'll either say it's the Supreme Lord or the individual soul. And they'll make their arguments for why their version is the correct version. And so what does Prabhupada do in his? He just translates it both ways and includes them both in the translation because both are viable. Do you guys follow that? Does that make sense?
Yes.
One who sees the super soul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade himself with the mind. He thus approaches the transcendental destination. By the way, if you see God in everybody, will you deal carefully in the world? Yes. If you see the same spiritual essence in all beings, will you deal carefully in the world? Yes. So even this verse fits with both readings of the previous verse. Sama, one who sees the same. Samam pashyan hi sarvachar, one who sees everywhere the same. Samavastitam ishwaram, one who sees the same Lord, situated equally everywhere. Na hingsati atmana atmanam. He doesn't degrade the self by the self. Tato yati param gatim. And thereafter he goes to the supreme destination. Hingsati is where you get the word ahimsa from. He doesn't harm himself. He doesn't harm the self by the self. Atmana atmanam. He doesn't harm the self by the self. Yati param gatim. He goes to the highest place. If you have this vision of equality where you see God in all things, then do you exploit anything? No. If you realize the girl's your sister, do you exploit her? No. If you realize the boy, the sexy boy, is your brother, do you try to get together with him? No. You can see a silhouette, like an attractive silhouette, whatever attractive means for you. You can see an attractive silhouette that can grab your attention. And then you realize it's your kid. And you're like, ugh. Just immediately, any attraction is removed. Knowledge is powerful. If you see Krishna is in everybody, you stop trying to exploit people. If you see everybody's just like you stop trying to exploit them. That's why narcissists, and specifically people with antisocial personality disorder, it's so disturbing, because cognitively you can explain that person feels pain just like you do, but because they lack the ability to empathize, they just don't really care. But normally, if you cognitively work it out that person feels pain just like I do, you feel awful if you do something bad to them, because you have a conscience. Conscience. How do you say consciousness in Spanish? Conciencia. How do you say conscience in Spanish? Conciencia. Same word. It's interesting. Conscience is a relatively recent English word, and in Spanish they don't have a separate word for it. The word conscience and consciousness are the same word. It's interesting, isn't it? You learn another language, and you learn something about your own language and the evolution of your language and your ideas. Now, your exact ideas might not be there in every culture. Different cultures have different ways of expressing similar things. So, one who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is creative material nature, and one who sees that the self does nothing actually sees. Prakritiaiva eva karmani. All actions, kriyamanani sarvasha. All actions are completely performed by Prakriti. Okay, so would that mean that you're not responsible for anything you do? Yes, it would. Why? What's wrong with you? All actions are completely performed by Prakriti. How does that not exonerate you from what you do?
Oh, I misheard your question.
Yeah, that's because you weren't listening. If you say that all actions are caused by nature, and you are not nature, you are the soul, does that free you from responsibility? Yes, it does. So we can't have a hard reading of that, because it would go against dozens of verses in the Gita. What would be the purpose of making such an absolute statement about Prakriti? Yeah, loud.
To make it clear that the soul is never disturbed, is
never fundamentally contaminated by material nature. Even though you might be enmeshed, even though it might be your fault, even though you might have chosen it, and this chapter itself said you're the cause of your enjoyment and suffering within Prakriti. But to make the point that you never fundamentally become one with the jail, that you never become a brain in a vat, that you never actually, brain in a vat's wrong, you ever become one with the virtual reality game, that you never become one with the jail cell, that you never become your car. Right? Therefore you say, it's all done by Prakriti. To really complete the thought, you have to say, it's all done by Prakriti, and Prakriti operates according to your desire. And so ultimately you're responsible. but you never become fundamentally corrupted. Each philosophy has their little sticking point. One sticking point is, I don't believe in consciousness, but it exists, and I have a massive sticking point. So I can explain, a la René Descartes, the phenomenal world, but I can't explain the numinous world, the world of mind, because my explanation of the world is just about objective reality, and I ignore subjective reality, which is just as real, if not more real, than objective reality, because your entire experience of objective reality is made possible by subjectivity, namely your own consciousness, which is fundamentally subjective and never objective. Did you guys follow that? We can objectively manage symptoms of consciousness, but we cannot objectively manage consciousness, because consciousness is fundamentally, in all cases, subjective, and it's also perceived subjectively. In some ways, you could say that we live in a biocentric universe where consciousness precedes matter. Anyway, the problem for an atheist philosopher is they have to explain consciousness, which becomes a hard problem for them. Now, if you're the theist, you have to explain, how did matter come from spirit? And how does spirit interface with matter? There's two major theories. One is, you are completely corrupted by matter. You are made from the earth. You have nothing intrinsically to do with God. The world was created ex nihilo, from nothing, by God. The world is filled with mammon. And you can achieve God by the omnipotence of the Lord, but fundamentally you're made of dust and dirt and mud, and you go back to this world. And just by God's grace, he kind of recreates you after you've died and become worm food. And that you're fundamentally corrupted. Adam and Eve messed up and you're fundamentally corrupted. The other argument is that you're fundamentally pure and you became covered over by matter, but you're fundamentally pure, and God created the best of all possible worlds, and that included a pure soul. And the pure soul might become corrupted on an external level, but it can all wash off. Spiritual life really consists of cleansing the self instead of recreating the self. Did you guys follow this? If you do say that we're cleansing the self, you still have to explain why it appears that we become enmeshed in matter. And then we use examples like dreams, or the example of wind in space, which takes over space but is actually different from space and can leave the space along with whatever foul odor the wind carries, and the space still remains free from those odors. We give different analogies. Krishna gives some. They're quite brilliant. To explain how we're in the world but not of it, the lotus. How we're enmeshed in matter but not quite completely. And these are the touchy places in any tradition, where their starting point has to get to their finish point, and they got to do some fancy footwork right in there. And give an explanation how you got from matter to consciousness, or give an explanation for how you got from consciousness to matter, or how you get from consciousness to consciousness appearing in matter, or how you enmesh yourself in matter without fully enmeshing yourself in matter. Do you understand? These are the sweet spots in any philosophy where they have to sing for their supper and give you satisfying explanations. So, the Vedic tradition is that you are never corrupted. You are always pure. And at the same time, you dream of corruption. And you dream in this world. This world is a great dream. But you're never actually separated from Krishna. And even now you're with Krishna. Krishna's with you in your heart. You're being held in the hand of God even now. And if you wake up, you'll be able to experience it. And you were never separate from Krishna. And really, matter is misunderstood spirit. And that's why when you offer matter to Krishna, like the flame or like food, it becomes prasad. It becomes re-spiritualized. And we actually, even right now, are living in the spiritual world, but we're in a little dark corner of the spiritual world where we've misidentified, and that misidentification is eternal. At the same time, it's not fundamentally as real as the spiritual world, which it exists as an overlay on top of. If you say the material world doesn't exist at all, that's incorrect. But if you say it exists equally with the spiritual world, you've misunderstood, because it's ontologically dependent on and overlaid on top of the spiritual world. And because we belong to the spiritual atmosphere, we never really fit with matter. We just appear to. Do you guys follow that? to make these type of points is why you have these absolute statements alongside less absolute statements about how different we are than matter, so that we'll really understand that we can truly free ourselves and be liberated from matter. Otherwise, you'll never believe that. You'll always believe that you're fundamentally stuck in matter. Do you guys follow that? Moving forward. When a sensible man ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and he sees how beings are expanded everywhere, he attains to the Brahman conception. At that time, he attains Brahman. When you can look at this world, which is filled with different stuff, but actually see how it's really not so complicated. Remember how at the beginning of class I gave you a bunch of weird stuff that made absolutely no sense based on our value system, and I tried to argue how gay ghosts snapping your fingers when you yawn, and society-wide pederasty and such, and marrying somebody you're not attracted to, and not even being closeted, but just choosing not to act, and choosing never to live sensually and only have sex to produce children. How all these just bizarre, wacko things from different cultures, if you really distill it down, they just become a different philosophy of life that makes sense and is contrastable to your own philosophy of life, and in some ways you might have something to learn from these people. Remember how I did that? That's you taking the world, which seems to be so different, and realizing that everybody's kind of the same. You follow? And now looking at this verse. Yada bhuta prityak bhavam. When you can see all the different beings in their different states, ekastam anupashati. But you see how it's actually all really in one state. Tata eva cha vistaram brahma sampadyate tada. At that time, when you can see that oneness within this world of difference, at that time you achieve Brahman. You follow? You completely or extensively achieve Brahman. Oh no, I'm sorry. You see that this one thing is, no. As you see that expansion, then you achieve Brahman. That you see that the one Brahman is expanded everywhere. It appears differently, but it's actually the same thing. And so I gave you an example of how you could take something which, don't look so confused. I gave you an example of how you could take something which looks different, but see the oneness in it. Similarly, you can do that with the whole world, and you can see how the same Brahman has expanded everywhere, and that the thread of continuity that ties everything together. At that time, you achieve Brahman realization, because you stop to see a material world filled with differences, and you start to see the Supreme Lord everywhere, souls in matter everywhere, and you start to pierce through the differences and stop seeing friends and enemies and us versus them, and you start to see the oneness. You guys following me? Those with the vision of eternity can see the imperishable soul is transcendently eternal and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled. When you can see that you are not entangled even though you're entangled, because fundamentally you've never become entangled. At that time, you're no longer entangled because you realize you're beyond it. Let me give you an example. You realize you're a soul even though you're in prison. You realize no one can imprison your mind. And even though you live in a prison, you're never imprisoned, because your mind expands without limit, you love God without limit, and you realize the kingdom of God is within. When you live in a body that's limited, but you realize that your consciousness and you're unlimited, you stop identifying with the body, and then it stops limiting you. And then you experience old age, disease, death, and everything else, but it's as a liberation. Just like a cat comes along and picks up its kitten, and that same cat comes along and picks up a rat. And when it picks up a rat, it bites down, and the rat feels the jaws of death. But when it picks up a kitten, the kitten just feels its mother coming to take it home. And so the experience of a devotee of this material world is not material. They have a spiritual experience. They begin to see Krishna everywhere and in everything. And so they stop seeing, they stop living in the material world, and they're jivan mukta. They're liberated even while living. Mukta means one who is liberated. Jiva means while still living. This is another phenomenon of the Vedic tradition. You have to wait till you die to achieve transcendence. You can actually achieve it in this world. And so, with the vision of eternity, you can see the imperishable soul as transcendental, eternal, and beyond material nature, despite being in contact with the body. The soul neither does anything nor is entangled. That's the vision you have to have, which then takes you to that place where the body no longer limits you. Are you guys following this? The sky. This is the example Krishna gave about himself a couple chapters before. I just gave it in relationship to the soul. But Krishna gave it in relationship to himself a few chapters before. That Krishna is space. And if you put air in space, does the air touch the space? No, it does not. The space accommodates the air. The air is dependent on the space for its existence. But the space continues to exist even when the air is gone. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it's all-pervading. Similarly, the soul, situated in Brahman vision, does not mix with the material body, though situated in the body. Now, the same verse, which was spoken by Krishna about himself and his relationship to this world, is also spoken about the soul in relationship to our relationship with the world. Because we have a lot in common with Krishna. Did we create the universe? No. Does everything depend on us? No. Are we omniscient? No. Are we the origin of all that exists? Nope. Does everything depend on us for all eternity? Nope. Are we omnipotent? Nope. Omniscient? Nope. Omnibenevolent? Nope. But we're eternal, outside this world, capable of a relationship with that deity, and fundamentally pure. So we have a lot in common with God, but not quite everything. We're like sparks into a flame, we are the angsas of God. We're the limbs of God. We're the sparks of God. We're parts of God. And so many of the verses which apply to Krishna also apply to us. As the sun alone illuminates all the universe, so does the living entity within the body illuminate the entire body. Krishna was as if 1,000 suns, rose at once. Or when you get divine realization, it's like the sun lighting up everything around it, right? Krishna says he like a shining lamp. It dispels the darkness in your heart. But now the soul itself is like a sun itself illuminating the body on a smaller scale, but the same principle of a pure consciousness. And so it's important to also explore the ways we're similar to God as we begin to achieve our spiritual and divine-like nature. Actually, divine nature. Krishna-like nature. And the last verse, those who see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage, they attain the supreme goal. So it's Chaitra and Chaitragya, and you have Jnana Chakshush. And you understand moksha as well. And that's, Gyayam, what's most important. So there's Jnanam, Gyayam, Chaitra, and Chaitragya. And Chaitra and Chaitragya have been made synonymous last week with Purusha and Prakriti, and therefore the Krishna verse now wraps the whole thing up. And if you understand these four things: who are you? What is the body? What's the most important thing? And how to get there. And if you understand those four things, you go to the supreme abode. And that's, again, Krishna distilling it down to the essence. It's actually a very simple point. It's what all philosophers have been looking after. It's what all philosophers have been trying to attain. Who am I? What is this world? What's my purpose of existence? How do I actuate my purpose of existence? What's the most valuable thing? How do I follow it? What's my hero's journey? What's my odyssey? What's worth pursuing? What's a good life? What's a great life? What's the topmost platform of existence? Who is God? Who am I? What's our relationship? What's this world? And the Gita might be using different language, different examples, but it's actually not different. It's the same thing being described. And you got to get to that place if you want to understand how these items are dealt with by different philosophies. Thank you very much, IGTV. Thank you also so very much, Facebook.